all the lawyers looking for trouble. And what the studies show is that when you have a lower conflict situation like that, it's the entire situation, both during the custody or divorce battle and afterwards, is lower conflict. And it's better for the children. You preserve more of the family, assets, money, rather than lawyers getting a hold of it. And that they're able to work to better as co-parents down the road. When they find if you have high conflict cases, they often end up with just the court will assign one parent as having custody, and now you're having a big inadequate power situation, and it tends to, even if the person that gets the custody doesn't want to, subconsciously there's a lot of factors going on that they have all the power, they can make the decisions.
Well, you've done studies, you've done tremendous amount of studies on divorces here in Connecticut.
Well, what we did is that we pulled data from the court records on 17,000 cases in Connecticut. And it turns out there's very little information from the Judicial Department in the state of Connecticut on the outcomes of divorce cases. So we have the best data that's out there. Of course, our data, it's getting a bit old now. It's from 2003, 2004, and it has its own limitations. But what we found was that in over 40% of the cases in Connecticut, it takes 3 years or more just to get a divorce. So that means that there's a lot of high conflict cases in Connecticut.
So for the 3 years that the divorce is going through, the children are under stress and suffering with however their situation is, I would assume, or presume.
Well, it's hard to see how it can be good for children to have these court battles raging while the children have their own needs.
So what does one do in that? Is that where we talk about mediation while the situation is going through? Who does the child stay with? How does that work out?
Well, often, I'm sorry to say, but when we get to court, it's possession is 9/10 of the law. So the person who has the children at the time you get to court, that person tends to win out in the custody battles. I don't think that's right, and it's definitely not in the best interest of the children to the extent that it limits the other parent, the non-custodial parent. But that's often the way it works in my experience anyway.
Well, basically, I know the limited amount of my involvement has seemed to proven that out is exactly what you're saying is who has possession, who was in there first, who was, and the conflict is usually a situation where, well, I think I talked to you before about before we got on the show. We've had 3 cases that we were involved in. One was a horrendous case where one side had the lawyers, the family knew the judges and stuff like that, and they demonized the woman. I mean, they actually demonized the woman and had a situation where they had full custody of the child, and we were able to go in there and reverse a lot of that because of constitutionality and because of threats, and changed it around where the woman regained her custody and stuff like that.
And how long did it take you to do that?
It took me over a year to get that. Yeah, over a year of being in the court. I can be real frustrated almost every week. If this person had to have a lot, because I would be considered a jailhouse lawyer and have some. I have some standing with civil rights cases in the past pertaining to prisons. So I went on a civil rights situation, and if they had to hire an attorney to do what I did, the cost factor would have been horrendous, absolutely horrendous.
They'd be in debt for the rest of their lives,
And
probably.
Probably. Well, we got a phone call, excuse me, and
Yeah.
good evening, you're on Street Talk with Father Russ.
Hi, it's Tambria.
Hi, how are you? This is Mike.
I'm fine. I called because I'm enjoying the show early on, and sorry I missed it because I did serve on the board of the Divorced Men's Association of Connecticut. So even though I would have been a female body, I would I would have fit right in. I just wondered. It's unclear to me from the conversation so far, though I understand what you're getting at. The difference between what we have in Connecticut with the presumption of joint custody in the statute as it is now and what you're asking for. Are you asking more that what we have now is upheld and reinforced, or are you asking for new legislation, and if so, what is it, and do you have legislative support?
Well, we have gotten legislation, to answer your last question first. There is some legislation that we influenced that was passed in 2005 that helps to define, what is in the best interest of the child and what are there were actually 14 factors mentioned by that law that should be considered by judges in determining the best interest of the child. So it tries to narrow things down a little bit and get the process more focused on the child. And basically the problem with joint custody that we do have in Connecticut right now is that it doesn't really have any influence on the decision-making responsibility of the parents or on the physical custody of the children. So you can have joint legal custody, but still the primary residency, I'm not a lawyer, okay, but this is our experience. The primary residency determines who gets to make the decisions and who gets to see the children most or all of the time. That's been our experience anyway. So the joint legal custody that we do have in Connecticut is somewhat meaningless in my experience anyway.
Right. I know at the time that I was involved, the Commission on the Status of Women did a study, and it was found that of all the areas in Connecticut court, civil, criminal, whatever, in family law, it was the men that suffered, and the men being the parents in divorce and custody situations. So there was a discrepancy in the application of law based primarily on that historical myth of the mother having a superior role or a maternal instinct, none of which is backed by science, but somehow the mother is in the minds of many of the attorneys and judges and society as the appropriate primary residence for that child.
I think
Are you still fighting that?
Well, it's hard to say. Our data actually didn't cover the gender of the custodial parent, and in general, we've heard the same stories you have, but it's very bad for either parent that's excluded from the lives of their children or very limited in the lives of their children, especially during the holiday season. There are many parents out there that we know of who do not get to see their children, even during the holiday season. They're prevented by the legal system from seeing their children. And these are parents that I have met and that I believe would be very good parents, except that they've gotten into a nasty legal battle and they've lost.
Right.
And the children have lost. The children lose out.
And I know the studies show that any absent parent places a higher risk of that child for failure in school, for criminal activity, for drug use, for incarceration later on. I mean, it just snowballs after that without having both parents around and supportive. There's some innate need we have to have whoever brought us into being attend to us in some way, whatever capacity they can. I'll let you guys talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Addressing last point, we feel that if there's a presumption of roughly equal time with both parents, in addition to the joint custody that she brought up, you simplify a lot of the battles in the court system. That's a lot of what it's about right now. As people feel they can get one over on the other parents, they can try to get most of the assets because they've got the kids, and leads to a whole